Hi and welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom. This is a superhero movie review and I'll be having a look at Thor the Dark World. So this is a sequel to the original Thor movie, of course, and the Avengers, and this takes place a couple of years after the last time we've seen Thor. And really, you have a prologue. The movie starts off with a prologue sort of by Odin, played by Anthony Hopkins, telling us a little bit about the sort of Dark Elves, and they were a race that were around before all of the other races beforehand, and lived in complete darkness, and ultimately were only challenged by the newer race, which was the Asgardians, and they were sort of banished with their leader Malekith, and their kind of item of power, so to speak, the ether, was taken away from them and sort of hidden away, and this basically allowed the Dark Elves to ultimately rule in complete darkness. And it's essentially the MacGuffin for the film, and sort of cue modern times, and Jane Foster happens to sort of stumble across this ether when that's the world is sort of starting to touch each other, because there's a time of convergence which happens once every 5,000 years, and this alerts Malekith to basically the presence, and ultimately sort of comes after Jane Foster. Now Thor, basically sort of being alerted to this, ultimately sort of takes her to Asgard and cue a kind of big old fight between the Dark Elves and the sort of Asgardians. And ultimately, Thor has to kind of join forces with Loki to try and sort of defeat Malekith and stop them from unleashing the darkness across all of the Nine Realms forever. So that's obviously a very kind of short plot summary there. So what's good about this movie? Okay, so if you're a kind of Loki fan, I think you'll get a lot from this movie. Apparently, they added some scenes to this to give him more screen time. I think you can totally tell the scenes that are added. Not necessarily a bad thing, but if you're a Loki fan, I think you'll get a lot from it, because he's less in it the first half, but his presence is always felt, I think, and I think he gives a very good performance as Loki. I think this time around Thor is a lot more sort of assured of himself and a lot more sort of even-handed. I mean, to be fair, you could sort of say maybe Thor doesn't go for more of a kind of a personal arc as much, because he's pretty much the same character at the beginning of the movie as is at the end. But nevertheless, I think it's a good performance from Chris Hemsworth. I have to say one thing: if you're a fan of Masters of the Universe, this might be a bit of a tangent here, I think this movie is going to be the nearest you're going to get to an actual Masters of the Universe film until we actually get one, because a lot of what you'll see here is a kind of mishmash of different things. So all the Asgardians pretty much fight with sort of fantasy weapons, if you see what I mean, and all the Dark Elves fight with more sort of technology, kind of laser-based weapons. So it's very much like the kind of the Masters of the Universe, where we have kind of both fantasy and sort of science sort of weapons at once. And it kind of reminded me, because a lot of them are sort of creatures and things, so it totally reminds me of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, I've got to say. I'd like to hear anyone else's opinion about that. And I actually quite like the different elements that you have here. So you have both, fantasy and sci-fi all kind of mixed up in one. I can see it may turn some people off, because it may be a little bit confusing to what's going on, but I actually thought it was quite good. It kind of made it a little bit more unique in sort of today's cinema and certainly today's sort of fantasy films, although, like I said, it is very much Masters of the Universe. I quite like, there's a character called Curse, it's from the comics, and he's a kind of Malekith's second in command, and he's a really good, I really like because he's a kind of brute character, ultimately the kind of the muscle, and there's some great fight scenes with him and Thor, basically, and kind of a lot of other Asgardians, and he seems genuinely a dangerous kind of enemy in a kind of like an actual one-on-one fight sort of scenario. And I think the director Alan Taylor, who is most well known for directing Game of Thrones, does a decent enough job of keeping it a very sort of a film that's kind of in a similar vein to the sort of the original Thor movie, but also you can tell that it's kind of, he's directed Game of Thrones, so there are certain things in the way that it's filmed that does very much reminds me of Game of Thrones, and that's not a bad thing. I think, actually I quite liked his touch. In regards to the negatives, there's one massive negative with this film, I have to say, and that is Malekith himself is really one-dimensional. He's given no sort of other sort of motivations, and he's just a bad guy, and he kind of wants to make the darkness. Well, you don't really say he seems to be perfectly capable of living without the darkness, but he just he's really given no development. He looks kind of cool, I have to say. I mean, I quite like the kind of the way the Dark Elves look. Although pretty much all, apart from Curse and Malekith, pretty much all the rest of the Dark Elves are just sort of stormtroopers ultimately, and kind of just fodder for people to hit and stuff. So, you know, I think the Dark Elves themselves were a little bit weak, to be honest, as kind of villains. And I think when you're coming from a movie that had Loki as the bad guy, who is almost such a beloved character, probably more so certainly than Thor, you can notice a difference where he's kind of certainly a weaker character. I think more could have been done with him. I don't think he has the potential to be interesting, but I don't think, you know, they kind of made the most of Malekith. I don't think, and that to me is probably the worst thing about this movie. The other thing, I think this is a problem that I saw in the first movie, and that was the kind of the Kat Dennings character Darcy. Now, in the first movie, I actually quite liked her. I know a lot of people didn't. A lot of people didn't like her kind of humour and kind of wish she wasn't in it, but I actually did like her in the first film. However, this movie, I did find her character to be quite annoying, and not just her, but she's also got this kind of like male love interest, this other new character that's introduced, and they're completely superfluous to the plot, really. You know, so it's, and the kind of the humour seems very forced to me. Just didn't need to be in there, and Eric Selvig as well, who of course was, you know, is obviously the scientist. Again, he's just there for sort of comedy relief and to give us a bit of like techno-babble explanation here and there. Again, I just didn't think his kind of those sections of the film really didn't sort of fit with the kind of the rest of the movie. I won't go into any spoilers. I will say this: there is a kind of a cameo of sorts from another sort of character. I won't tell you what it is. Not exactly what you'd expect, but there is a cameo. I want to talk a little bit about the stingers as well. There is 2 stingers. So make sure there's one midway through the credits, which is kind of all I would say, it's kind of introducing you to the world of the Guardians of the Galaxy, but there is a connection to Thor within it. And apparently that wasn't directed by Alan Taylor, and he's not a big fan of it. And there is a second stinger right at the end of the credits, which actually serves as more of both an epilogue to the film and just a kind of funny moment. Overall, I think it was a fairly decent film. I certainly don't think it was the strongest Marvel film. I think it's one that people enjoy, but I don't think it's one that necessarily people will kind of watch a lot of times. It promises that Thor will return, obviously in Avengers 2, I guess, and or possibly a Thor 3 movie, which I believe he is sort of contracted to. So I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10. I quite enjoyed it. It was, a decent movie. I know it's got kind of mixed reviews, but I think if you're a Marvel fan, you probably won't be disappointed with it, but you won't be up there with the kind of the best ones, I don't think. So what are your opinions on it? Oh, one last thing. I did see it in 3D. Well, where you have the sort of scenes on the kind of these fantasy realms like Asgard and stuff, I think the 3D, you do notice it. So it's probably not too bad in 3D, because there is a lot of time you spend on these, both Asgard and kind of, a few of the other sort of realms as well. But to be quite honest, there's nothing outstanding. I think maybe Captain America with his throwing the shield, maybe the best of Marvel film to see out the kind of singular heroes. I don't think it's essential that you see. It's quite nice, but to be honest, I forgot I was watching the 3D. After a while, you don't even know. There's not certain things where that it kind of pops and you think, oh wow, that was good in 3D. There's not really moments like that, but you do notice it certainly in the beginning of the movie when you kind of go onto Asgard, you'll sort of see, but not as good, but not essential. So anyway, 7 out of 10. Leave me a comment. What did you think about it if you've seen it? And I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.